Before we begin, if you enjoy unexpected life stories, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring even more gripping stories every day. My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 41 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that the workplace could be a place of trust and even friendship. I wasn't naive. I knew competition existed everywhere, but I always thought that if you worked hard, stayed honest, and treated people with respect, you'd be rewarded in the long run. And maybe, if you were lucky, you'd find people you could count on, even at work. When I first joined H&L Consulting, I was filled with that kind of optimism. It was a mid-sized firm that specialized in logistics and supply chain projects. For me, it felt like arriving at the place where I could finally build a career with stability and growth. I had spent my 20s in small firms, grinding out endless hours, wearing multiple hats, doing whatever needed to be done. Those are the kinds of jobs where you don't get much recognition, but you come away with scars and experience. By the time I reached my mid-30s, I thought I had finally earned the right to settle into something bigger. At H&L, things went well at first. I was valued. My specialty was finding ways to streamline processes for clients, and I had a knack for spotting inefficiencies others overlooked. I loved the puzzle of it, the feeling that even the most complex supply chain could be untangled if you just looked at it the right way. And then Ethan joined the company. Ethan Clark, early 30s, confident, sharp, the kind of guy who knew how to command attention the second he walked into a room. He wasn't just good at the technical side of things, he was magnetic. Clients loved him. Managers loved him. He had that charisma that made people want to agree with whatever he was saying. And in those first weeks, I liked him too. We got along quickly. We ate lunch together, complained about the long hours, swapped stories about our lives outside of work. He came to my house once for a barbecue. He met my wife, shook hands with my kids. Back then, if someone had asked me if I trusted him, I would have said yes without hesitation. He seemed like not just a colleague, but a friend. But I should have noticed the cracks sooner. The first time it happened, I barely even thought about it. We were in a brainstorming meeting, tossing around ideas. I suggested a new approach to warehouse distribution. Ethan immediately chimed in, "Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say," and the group nodded, credit flowing his way. I laughed it off. Who cares about one idea? It's a team effort anyway. But then it happened again and again. I'd share something casually with him, over coffee in the hallway, and then I'd hear it come out of his mouth in a meeting, phrased a little differently, polished, and suddenly it was his contribution. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. We worked in the same field, after all. Maybe we just thought alike. But deep down, I felt it. That sting of being overlooked. That strange silence when people praised him for something I had done. 6 months later, the company announced promotions. Ethan's name was on the list. Mine wasn't. I told myself I wasn't bitter, that maybe it wasn't my time yet. But when I sat in that room and heard our manager praise Ethan's innovative strategies and fresh client approaches, I clenched my jaw until it hurt. Those so-called innovations were mine. I went home that night and told my wife. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched dinner, saying, "It's like I don't exist. I do the work, I come up with the ideas, but he's the one they see." She tried to reassure me, told me maybe my chance would come next time. But something in me whispered that it wasn't chance at all. This was deliberate. Ethan kept up the act of being my friend. He'd slap me on the back after meetings, invite me for drinks, thank me for helping him think through problems. I remember one night at a bar, he lifted his glass and said, "You know, Daniel, we make a great team. You've got the groundwork. I've got the vision. Together, we can't lose." He smiled as he said it, and everyone else would have taken it as a compliment. But it twisted in my stomach. Groundwork. Vision. In his mind, he was the genius, and I was just the guy doing the grunt work. Still, I said nothing, because saying something felt risky. I didn't want to be the guy complaining about credit. Nobody wants to hear that. I thought maybe if I just kept my head down, kept working, eventually the truth would speak for itself. Then came the theft that changed everything. We were preparing for a big client pitch, one that could bring in millions for the company. I had worked tirelessly on a model that would cut the client's transportation costs dramatically. I stayed late nights, built spreadsheets, crafted slides. I showed parts of it to Ethan because I thought we were collaborating. The day of the pitch, I sat in the conference room, ready to present. But before I could even plug in my laptop, Ethan stood up, smiled confidently, and began his presentation. Slide after slide, he walked them through my model, my analysis, my carefully chosen words. And everyone loved it. The client nodded along. My managers praised him. Applause filled the room. I sat there, silent, my face burning, my hands clenched under the table. And when it was over, Ethan turned to me, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Great job, partner." Partner. As if I should be grateful he had taken my work and paraded it around as his own. That night, I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel, my mind spinning. That was the moment I knew this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was betrayal. And if I didn't do something, it was going to keep happening until my career was nothing but shadows of his success. I went home, sat on the edge of my bed while my wife slept, and thought about what to do. I felt humiliated, angry, and, most of all, foolish for ever trusting him. But even in that moment of despair, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let him keep doing this. I wasn't going to stay silent forever. That night, I decided I would fight back. The morning after that decision, I walked into the office and felt like I was carrying a secret no one else could see. Ethan greeted me like always, big smile, cheerful tone, like he hadn't just gutted me in front of an entire room the day before. He joked about the long night of work and how relieved he was the client had loved the pitch. I forced a smile back, nodding, pretending to share his relief, even though inside my blood boiled. What struck me most was how comfortable he was. It wasn't guilt I saw on his face, it was satisfaction. He didn't just steal my work. He was proud of it, proud enough to look me in the eye and act as if nothing had happened. That was the moment I understood the scale of what I was dealing with. Ethan wasn't an accidental opportunist. He wasn't just riding along. He was deliberate, calculated. He had been building his reputation on my back, step by step, and I had let him. After that pitch, the dynamic at work shifted even more. Ethan became the rising star of the department. Management sought him out, clients requested him by name, and his voice carried weight in meetings. My own contributions seemed to fade into the background. It wasn't that I wasn't working just as hard. I was, but somehow his shadow always fell across me, swallowing up the light before it could land. And Ethan knew it. He thrived on it. He'd clap me on the shoulder and say things like, "Don't worry, Dan, your time will come," as if he was some generous mentor instead of the thief he was. He spun a narrative in which I was the dependable support act, the guy who kept things running while he dazzled the room. And people bought it. They bought it because Ethan was so good at wearing the mask of brilliance, while I was just trying to do honest work. I told myself to be patient, to gather strength, to wait for the right moment. But the betrayal didn't stop. If anything, escalated. There was the missed deadline on a report he was responsible for. Somehow, by the time management heard about it, my name was the one tied to the failure. While I tried to correct the misunderstanding, Ethan stepped in with a sympathetic tone and said, No, it wasn't really Daniel's fault. He's been under a lot of stress. I probably should have supported him more." And just like that, the conversation turned from his mistake into a narrative about me struggling, me being overwhelmed, me needing his guidance. It was gaslighting, and it was brilliant in its cruelty. He not only deflected blame, but also positioned himself as the compassionate colleague, the one covering for me. And every time I bit my tongue because what could I say? That the guy who looked like a team player was secretly gutting me behind the scenes? Another time, I discovered emails that had never reached me. Clients waiting for answers I never saw. When I confronted Ethan about it, he acted surprised, said maybe IT had messed something up. But the pattern repeated. Critical messages routed through him somehow vanished until it was too late, and he could step in as the hero who caught the mistake and fixed it. The paranoia set in slowly. I started second-guessing everything. If I spoke up in meetings, would he twist my words? If I shared an idea over coffee, would it end up in his deck tomorrow? If I left my laptop open, would I find my files raided again? The breaking point came with another high-stakes project. This one wasn't just big, it was career-defining. The client was a massive player, and landing them meant prestige and serious promotions for whoever led the charge. Ethan positioned himself as the natural lead, and management didn't question it. Why would they? He was their golden boy. But I worked harder than ever. Nights, weekends, every ounce of energy poured into building the strategy. I crafted something airtight, something that would impress even the harshest skeptics. And I was careful, so careful. I backed up every file, saved timestamps, emailed drafts to myself, so there would be a trail. Still, the night before the presentation, I came back to my desk from a coffee run and noticed something off. My laptop was open when I was sure I had closed it. My documents were on the screen. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to guess who had been there. The next day, it played out like déjà vu. Ethan stood in front of the executives, walking them through my work as if it had come from his own genius. But this time, it wasn't just an idea or a slide. It was everything. Every number, every projection, every phrase. Word for word. And once again, the applause went to him. That night, I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could barely breathe. He had taken everything. He had left me with nothing. For the first time, I considered giving up, walking away from the company, maybe even the industry. After all, what was the point if someone like him could rewrite reality so easily? But then something shifted. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the realization that if I didn't act, I'd spend the rest of my life being trampled by people like Ethan. Whatever it was, I made a decision. I was going to fight back. I didn't know exactly how yet. I didn't know how long it would take. But I knew one thing. I had underestimated him before. I had thought he was just a little opportunistic, just riding my coattails. I had been wrong. Ethan was ruthless. And if I wanted to survive, I had to be smarter than him. So I started documenting everything. Every idea I had, I wrote down and emailed to myself, time-stamped. Every file, every draft, I saved in multiple places. I began keeping a quiet log of his mistakes, the ones he smoothed over so easily. When he made a miscalculation, I noted it. When he missed a deadline, I marked it. I didn't call him out right away. I let the evidence stack up like bricks in a wall. And slowly, I began to see openings. I knew it wouldn't be quick. People like Ethan didn't fall overnight. They were too careful, too skilled at shaping the story in their favor. If I rushed it, if I made one wrong move, I looked like the bitter colleague making baseless accusations. That was the trap, and I wasn't going to walk into it. So I played the long game. I became quieter in meetings, letting him dominate the spotlight. But behind the scenes, I doubled down on my documentation. I began writing detailed notes after every conversation. Every meeting, every project handoff. At first it felt obsessive, but over time it became liberating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was regaining control. I knew what I had said, when I had said it, and how to prove it. At home, my wife noticed the difference. "You're calmer," she said one evening as I was typing up notes at the kitchen table. I smiled faintly and told her I was just being more organized. I didn't want to burden her with the full extent of the war I was fighting at work. But inside, I felt a new kind of fire. There were nights when the doubt still crept in. Lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I'd wonder if I was wasting my time. What if all the evidence in the world didn't matter? What if Ethan's charm and connections outweighed any hard proof I gathered? That fear was real, but it was also what kept me pushing. I couldn't let the thought of giving up become stronger than the will to fight. Weeks passed, and then months. Ethan continued his show, swooping in with polished versions of my work, maneuvering himself into the limelight, soaking up praise. But while he basked, I was laying traps. I started deliberately feeding him small errors in my drafts, just subtle enough that they looked real, but obvious enough that someone thorough would catch them. I wanted to see if he would copy them blindly. And he did. Every time. He was so eager to parade what he thought was my polished work that he didn't notice the cracks. Each time he stumbled, I quietly corrected the mistake in my own version, with time-stamped proof that my documents had been accurate. Slowly, I was building a case not only that the work was mine, but that Ethan wasn't as flawless as he appeared. I also began speaking less casually with him. No more tossing out ideas over coffee. No more just between us brainstorming. I kept things close, gave him scraps, and watched how quickly those scraps ended up recycled as his. The pattern was undeniable, and the pile of evidence on my side kept growing. But the real turning point came when the company landed its biggest opportunity yet. A multinational client, the kind that could transform reputations overnight. Success here meant bonuses, promotions, and serious recognition. Naturally, Ethan pushed to lead the project, and naturally, management agreed. To them, he was the star. I knew this was it. My moment. If I played this right, the truth would finally come out. If I failed, Ethan would cement himself as untouchable, and I'd never recover. So I threw myself into the work with everything I had. I worked long hours, double-checking every number, every chart, every projection. I didn't cut corners. And most importantly, I held back the most critical pieces, keeping them to myself, hidden away until the exact right moment. The days leading up to the presentation were some of the most tense of my life. Ethan strutted around the office, full of confidence, already talking about how the executives were going to be blown away. He winked at me and said, "Don't worry, Dan. I'll make sure to mention your support." That word again, support. As if I was nothing more than his assistant. I smiled back, but inside I was steady. I had waited too long for this. The morning of the presentation, I dressed carefully, chose a dark suit, and looked in the mirror for a long time before leaving the house. My wife kissed me on the cheek and said, "You've got this." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if she knew what this really was. The conference room was full. Executives, managers, even the CEO herself. This was the biggest audience I'd ever faced. My heart raced, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, calmly. Ethan was at the front, adjusting his slides, grinning like he already owned the room. And then it began. He walked them through the strategy, confident, smooth, every gesture rehearsed. But I could see the small cracks, the numbers that didn't align, the projections that contradicted each other. I knew them because I had planted them. And as the executives flipped through the printouts, I watched their brows furrow, watched them whisper to each other. By the time he reached the end, the room was unsettled. A few polite claps, but mostly silence. Ethan's smile faltered. He hadn't expected this. That was when I stood up. Calmly, without drama, I walked to the front, plugged in my drive, and said, "If I may, I'd like to walk you through the corrected version." The room turned toward me. Ethan stiffened, and then I began. Every slide was clean, every number checked, every projection airtight. The questions came hard and fast, but I had the answers ready, backed up with documents, emails, timestamps. Every hole in Ethan's version was patched in mine. By the time I finished, the room was silent again, but this time it wasn't doubt. It was realization. The CEO leaned forward, looked at me directly, and said, "Outstanding work, Daniel. Exactly what we needed." Ethan opened his mouth, tried to stammer something about drafts and last-minute changes, but it was too late. The tide had turned. For the first time in years, I wasn't the shadow. I was the light. I walked out of that room with my head high. After that meeting, everything began to unravel for Ethan. It didn't happen instantly, and in some ways that was even better. The silence in the room that day had been louder than any accusation I could have made. People saw what they needed to see. They saw the cracks in his story, the confidence slipping, the contrast between what he had presented and what I had delivered. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift. Managers who used to greet Ethan with open admiration now looked at him with careful eyes. Questions began to circle, quiet ones at first. Why had there been so many inconsistencies in his work? Why had my version been airtight while his was riddled with holes? Nobody said it outright, but suspicion had entered the room, and suspicion is a poison that spreads fast. Ethan tried to recover. He came to me privately one afternoon, his smile thinner than usual. "Hey, Dan," he said, clapping me on the back like always. "Great job the other day. You really saved the team. I was juggling too many drafts, must have gotten wires crossed. Lucky you had a backup." I looked him in the eye and forced a neutral expression. "Yeah, lucky." But we both knew it wasn't luck. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind his eyes. Fear. He knew the mask was slipping. The unraveling continued slowly but surely. In the next few weeks, I kept working steadily, carefully, delivering results backed with evidence, always leaving a trail. Ethan, on the other hand, began to stumble. Without easy access to my groundwork, his polish didn't shine as brightly. Clients asked tougher questions. Managers scrutinized him more closely. And each time he faltered, it added weight to the growing doubt around him. Then came the moment of no return. One of the executives requested a breakdown of how the strategy had been developed, an audit trail, essentially, of the work leading up to the presentation. I had mine ready. Every draft, every timestamp, every correction. Ethan did not. What he handed looked thin, rushed, and suspiciously incomplete. That was the nail in the coffin. Within a week, word spread quietly through the office that Ethan was moving on. There was no big announcement, no farewell party. Just one day his desk was cleared, and he was gone. When I walked past that empty space, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. For so long, I had fantasized about this moment, about watching him fall. But when it finally happened, it wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief. Relief that the constant shadow, the constant pressure, the constant betrayal was over. A few weeks later, I was called into a meeting with the CEO. She thanked me for my work, not just on the project, but on my consistency, my thoroughness, my ability to deliver under pressure. And then she offered me the promotion I had been chasing for years, senior consultant, leading my own team. I walked out of that office in a daze. I thought about calling my wife immediately, about telling her the news, but instead I just sat at my desk for a long moment, staring at the screen, letting it sink in. This wasn't just a promotion. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't been crazy, that I hadn't been paranoid, that all those nights of doubt and despair hadn't been for nothing. At home, when I finally told her, my wife hugged me tight and whispered, "I knew you'd get here." I never doubted it. Her faith had carried me through more than she knew. In the weeks and months that followed, I settled in my new role. Leading a team was a new challenge, but one I embraced. I made a silent promise to myself. I would never let anyone on my team feel the way I had felt. I would make sure credit was given where it was due, that trust wasn't just a word but a practice. Sometimes, though, late at night, I still thought about Ethan. I wondered where he ended up, whether he found another company to charm, another colleague to drain dry. I wondered if he ever regretted what he had done, or if he just saw me as an obstacle he couldn't quite overcome. Maybe he told himself I had sabotaged him. Maybe he even believed it. I'll never know. What I do know is this. His betrayal taught me something I will never forget. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who claps you on the back is cheering for your success. Some people see trust as a tool to exploit, as a weakness to manipulate. But betrayal, as painful as it is, doesn't have to be the end. It can be the forge that shapes you, the fire that burns away illusions and leaves behind something stronger. I came out of that war bruised, yes, but also sharper, wiser, more resilient. And in the end, I won. Not just the promotion, not just the recognition, but the knowledge that I had faced betrayal head-on and survived it. So if you've ever been where I was sidelined, stolen from, made to feel invisible, don't let it break you. Document. Protect yourself. Trust carefully, but don't let their lies define your truth. Because the truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of shining through. And when it does, the victory is sweeter than anything they could have taken from you. Thank you for watching. If this story kept you listening until the end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps us grow. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you feel while listening to this story? Share your impressions in the comments below. I read every one of them. And if you want more stories of revenge, betrayal, and unexpected twists, check out the related videos on this channel. You won't want to miss them.